Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn. Today we're chatting with Camille Labchuk about animal welfare laws in Canada. Canadians love animals and we all want animals to be treated well, whether they're pet animals, zoo animals, or farm animals. While I eat meat, I still want the animals that are raised for food to be treated well. And I think that this is a sentiment all of us share. Camille is an animal welfare lawyer and executive director of the not for profit Animal Justice, which is Canada's only law not for profit. And they've been involved in some fascinating and important animal law cases, with many more to look forward to in 2024. Camille, thanks so much for joining me today. Now, Animal Justice has a lot going on this year. Let's talk about one of your campaigns that a lot of people may be familiar with, which is ending elephant and great ape captivity. What can you tell me about some recent federal proposals on that issue?
Well, thanks, Christine. Yeah, so there's some exciting work being done right now to better align federal laws with Canadians' values. And I think if you ask most people, they don't think it's okay anymore for animals like great apes and elephants to be kept in zoos, in tiny enclosures, often in inappropriate climates for these species. So there is a federal bill right now introduced by the government in the Senate, Bill S-15, that aims to phase out captivity of great apes and elephants from Canadian zoos. It's really exciting to see. We are also hoping through the legislative process to get it amended to include big cats as well. I think probably a lot of people watching this right now have also watched Tiger King. We know how dangerous those operations can be and how bad they can be for animals like lions and tigers.
Now, I know elephant captivity has been a big issue because the Toronto Zoo ended their elephant captivity program. A big part of that was because of what the public discussion around it has been the climate, the difficulty elephants would have in a cold climate like Ontario. So, how many elephants do remain in captivity in Canada? Is this still an issue?
Unfortunately, it is. There are still, to my knowledge, 23 elephants still alive in Canada. One is Lucy, the elephant at the Edmonton Zoo, the northernmost elephant we think in the world. There are no longer any in Ontario at the Toronto Zoo, but there is the African lion safari, which still has quite a few, over a dozen. And then there's a few in Quebec as well. So it is still a live issue. The climate's obviously a concern, as well as the space that they're afforded, because elephants in the wild would roam for dozens of kilometers sometimes every day and live in large, large social groups. And they just don't get that in captivity.
Now, another issue that I think the public cares about on animals in captivity is whale captivity. There was this famous documentary a few years ago, I think called Blackfish, that dealt with challenges of keeping, in particular, killer whales in a captivity. But I know there's all kinds of different whales, including beluga whales, that are kept in captivity in Ontario, and we've seen a lot of them, becoming sick, dying, or developing mental distress. What can you tell me about whale captivity in Canada?
Well, I'll start with the good news. The good news is that in 2019, Parliament passed a ban on any new whale and dolphin captivity, except for legitimate rescue reasons. So that means that the animals who are currently at Marineland right now, and there are still a number of belugas and I think three dolphins who are still alive, they will be the last of their kind. But the bad news is that those animals are still suffering, and we don't see much provincial action to help them. So we have belugas who are continuing to die at Marineland. Just almost a year ago, last March, Kiska, the last orca whale in captivity, she died as well after decades in a tiny, tiny tank. So the good news is the practice is on its way out, but we still need to do what we can to improve life for those who still remain.
Now, there have also been moves to ban what are referred to as puppy mills in Ontario in particular. We've got only about a minute left. First, before we talk about the legal changes, can you explain what a puppy mill is?
Yes, a poppy mill is a typically a confined operation, oftentimes in a barn or a shed or someone's basement, where dogs, sometimes dozens or maybe even hundreds, are kept and forced to pump out litter after litter of puppies. The intense number of dogs crowded into tiny spaces, along with filthy conditions, are characteristic of a puppy mill.
And just in 10 seconds or so, how prevalent is this in Canada?
Very prevalent. We have a massive puppy mill problem, and unfortunately, no province is taking effective action yet to tackle it.
Okay, we've got to go to commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk about the Ontario proposal to ban puppy mills and how effective you think it'll be. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing animal welfare laws with lawyer and director of animal justice, Camille Labchuk. Now, Camille, the Ontario government recently introduced a bill to address puppy mills. What is that bill? What exactly is it proposing? And how effective do you think it will be in addressing some of these cruelties that we're concerned about related to puppy mills?
Yeah, so the bill is called the PUPS Act, Preventing Unethical Puppy Sales Act, and it unfortunately, I do want to say I applaud the government for recognizing that puppy mills are a problem, but what they put forward in this bill is not going to tackle that problem. So, Christine, the first thing people need to understand is that one of the reasons puppy mills are thriving across Canada is because no one regulates dog breeding. If the government doesn't know where dogs are being kept and where they're being bred, and again, these are often in people's barns or basements, then no one can go in there and force the laws and make sure that the puppies and the dogs who are used for breeding are actually kept in acceptable conditions. So, what this bill doesn't do, first of all, that's a huge red flag, is it doesn't do anything to track or register or monitor where dog breeding is happening. Anyone can continue to breed dogs without any oversight. So, that's a big problem. It does say you can't breed a dog more than, 3 times within 2 years. It says you can't keep them in really dirty conditions. So there is some good stuff in there, but I'm really concerned that it's going to be unenforceable legislation because there's no way of tracking where these operations exist.
Aren't there already laws on the books that would prohibit confining a dog to an extremely small space, which is one of the problems with puppy mills?
Sadly, there's not in most places. So there's no space limit in this bill or an existing law that would say, like, if you're going to be breeding a dog, here's how much space they're entitled to. Here's how many times a day they have to get exercised. Here's what type of food or veterinary care they should receive. And unfortunately, the PUPS Act doesn't address any of those things either. So I'm really concerned that if this bill passes, we'll be left essentially with the same conditions, with puppy mills operating without anyone knowing where they are, and dogs who don't have to ever get exercise, ever see fresh air, ever frolic in the snow or in a field.
So for someone who does want to get a pet dog, what advice do you have about what they should be looking for, about where they're getting a dog, and how if they want a purebred dog, how to avoid supporting a puppy mill?
It's a really good question because so many of us are dog lovers and want to add those family members to our homes. And I don't think anybody wants to support a puppy mill. So by doing a little research, everyone can have a huge impact on this horrible, horrible industry. So the first thing I tell people is please consider adopting, not shopping. Christine, because of the pandemic, when everyone went out and purchased or adopted dogs, and now people are back in the office, now people have fewer resources because of economic concerns, so many dogs are being given up to shelters and rescues right now. And unfortunately, those shelters are at capacity. Some dogs are just being turned away, and it really scares me to think where they might go. So there's amazing adoptable animals out there right now. These are dogs who, through no fault of their own, are being surrendered. Oftentimes, they are purebred dogs if someone's interested in that. So that's tip number one. Tip number two, avoid websites like Kijiji or online ads for dogs because those are often puppy mill dogs. And if you're speaking with someone about purchasing a dog from them, make sure that you meet the dog's parents. Make sure that you can see the conditions where they're kept. Don't meet them in a mall parking lot. Don't meet them at a gas station somewhere in a rural area. Make sure you can see those conditions yourself.
Now, when you talk about rescue dogs, one of the things that you've been working on is challenging or pushing back, I guess, against a relatively new prohibition on rescue dogs being imported from certain countries. What can you tell me about this prohibition on foreign rescue dogs and what your concerns are with that prohibition?
So, about a year and a half ago, the federal government banned imports of dogs from most of the countries in the world on the basis that there could be rabies in those countries and we could risk bringing dogs with rabies into Canada. Now, rabies is obviously a really legitimate concern. No one wants dogs to get rabies, no one wants that to pass to humans. I'm glad CFIA is considering taking measures about this, but no other country in the world has put a blanket ban on dog rescue in effect. And what Canada is doing is just that. There's not really any exceptions to these rescue bans, even if
Isn't
dogs are
isn't
really
rabies I mean, my dog has rabies shots. It's completely preventable. Why couldn't that just be the requirement instead of a blanket ban?
Well, that's exactly it. We've all now been through COVID. We know a lot about disease transmission. Dogs can get rabies shots, 100% preventable with vaccines. If there's concerns about improper shots or fraudulent vaccine certificates, the way you do that is you take a blood test and you see if the dog has developed those proper antibodies. You could even implement a quarantine period once they come into Canada and another test and more vaccines. There's lots of ways to address this. But what Canada's done is just a
Mhm.
blanket ban. So, Christine, all these amazing
Right,
rescue groups in Canada that
right.
work internationally are out in the cold.
We've got to go to break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing animal welfare laws with lawyer Camille Labchuk. Now, Camille, and for our viewers, this story is very disturbing. So, if you have any children in the room, you should probably remove them. I want to talk about a story that was recently reported in the Ottawa Citizen. It described a bestiality ring that was run by a man in the Ottawa Valley. And the accused, a man named Steve Cernosky, was accused of grooming a teenage boy, a 15-year-old boy with autism, and pressuring this boy to engage in bestiality with Cernosky's dogs, which were a large breed St. Bernards. And then he took images and extorted the boy. And Cernosky pleaded guilty to the bestiality and extortion. And the judge told the court, I see a lot of disturbing cases, but this case tops them all. It is truly revolting. But Cernosky was sentenced only to time served and is now out of jail with 3 years probation and a ban on owning animals. Now, the facts of this case are so disturbing and so tragic, and I'm concerned that there doesn't seem to be a guilty plea here for the abuse of a minor, of a teenager. Camille, what do you think of this sentence? Do you think this is enough? Do you think that the bestiality laws are tough enough? Because I think the man served 700 or so days in jail, and this seems to me to be a horrible, horrible crime.
It's honestly one of the most disturbing stories I've ever read, and I have done cases involving bestiality before. Animal justice has intervened at the Supreme Court about this issue, and when our laws were found to be insufficient, we helped get laws passed covering all bestiality. So I will say this is horrifying. One thing I'm encouraged by in the sentence is that he was banned from owning animals in the future. I think that's a really important
Is that
part of
not
this.
always the case in cases like this?
Well, until the changes that were made in 2019 that we were involved with, it actually wasn't even permitted for judges to implement an animal ownership ban in the future for a case of bestiality. So we really, really pushed for that change to be in there. So I really hope that will help in this case because it is so shocking.
And what are typical sentences like in crimes like this? I mean, I don't see a lot of convictions for this, but does this seem low or high? I mean, certainly one of the disturbing things is that there doesn't seem to be a conviction here for the sexual offenses against this boy other than the extortion charges. But do you have a sense of how reasonable the sentence is?
I Yeah, I think that bestiality sentences are always somewhat different because the facts of each case are different. And you see some cases that are obviously still very distressing, but perhaps not as on the high end of the scale as this one. So to me, this is one of the longer bestiality sentences that I've actually seen, but I think the case law is still evolving. I mentioned a case that we were involved with. That was a 2016 judgment from the Supreme Court that came out. I think you've seen courts and also law enforcement taking bestiality a lot more seriously since that time when it started to get more public discussion about the real harms that this offense causes both to animals and often to humans.
Yeah, certainly in this case, that is, there's the boy who this happened to, who's now 20 or in his early 20s, said that his life has been ruined by what happened. Now, I want to move on. I want to shift gears here because a lot of what we've been paying attention to and what the public pays a lot of attention to relates to pet animals. But that's obviously only part of the picture. What do you think gets lost when we move in terms of the public concern What do you think gets lost when we shift from pet animals to farm animals?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a really important one. Pets are so close to us. We live with our cats and dogs and rabbits and other furry or scaled creatures every day, and we see them and we feel concern over them. Farmed animals are kept behind closed doors in Canada, and so most of us never develop the chance to have a relationship with a farmed animal in the sense of getting to know what their personalities are like. Sometimes we see cows in the field as we drive by, and that's kind of it. But unfortunately, in Canada, we actually don't have any laws governing the welfare of animals on farms. So there's no regulations that say you can't keep chickens inside tiny, tiny cages their entire lives or mother pigs in gestation crates. And this is actually a step behind a lot of other Western nations, like most of the EU, many US states, which have passed these types of bans. So I'm excited to see more and more as people starting to become sensitive to these concerns. And when they're shown the truth about what happens and some of the practices that are common on Canadian
Mhm.
farms, people really are motivated to be part of the solution.
Now, one of the ways people get that sense of what's happening on farms is through video documentation of what's happening on farms. We've got to go to break, but I want to talk about these ag gag laws when we come back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing animal welfare laws with lawyer Camille Labchuk. Now, Camille, in the last segment, we were talking about farmed animals, and one of the points you made is a lot of people don't know, how farm animals are treated. We might not have a lot of disclosure about their treatment. And one of the ways we learn about the treatment of farm animals is through reporting, video or audio or journalistic reporting on what's going on at farms. But there have been a number of pieces of legislation that sort of restrict how that reporting can take place. And these are something you refer to as ag gag or agriculture gag laws. Now, you're involved in some legal challenges to these laws, but first, can you explain what the law is and then move on to what exactly you're challenging?
Absolutely. So ag-gag laws currently exist in their worst forms in Ontario and Alberta. And those provinces say that you cannot work undercover as a journalist or an animal advocate at a factory farm or slaughterhouse for the purpose of filming and exposing what you see, even if you see unlawful, illegal, or immoral conduct. So it essentially restricts people's freedom of expression and restricts the ability of the public to learn accurate information about the truth of what's happening behind closed doors on farms.
Now, is the basis for this prohibition what? Is it for the safety? Because I understand large industrial spaces can obviously create safety concerns if people are going in from the public to report on what's happening. But my understanding is even if you have been employed to work in this place and trained, you would still not be able to do this type of undercover reporting.
That's right. So what the laws target is using any sort of false premise to get onto a property. So if someone applied for a job and didn't disclose that they were an undercover journalist, that would be the type of thing that could get them in hot water. There's not really any legitimate rationale for these laws. The government has never been able to articulate a clear public safety, worker safety or animal safety reason for them. It's really just about making sure that bad PR for the farming industry doesn't make its way onto the nightly news.
And so, what's the status? You're challenging this. Is it a charter challenge on the basis of to be freedom of expression or freedom of the press, or and what stage is that challenge at right now?
That's exactly right, Christine. So in Ontario, we argued a charter challenge in Superior Court back in October regarding 2B. So we said that these types of laws restrict both the rights of a person who might want to go into a farm. So it restricts the type of speech that you can engage in to get a job at a farm. And it also restricts the rights of the public to receive accurate information. Section 2B protects not just the speaker, but also the listener as well. And we say the public is suffering an injury as a result of that. So we are waiting for a decision in Ontario. I expect it sometime in the next few months. And in the meantime, we're considering how to effectively challenge ag laws in Alberta, a less serious one in Manitoba, and we're continuing to fight a federal ag bill as well.
Interesting. Now, I want to shift gears again to another area that you work on, which is cosmetic testing in animals, because I think that there is a public consultation going on right now related to cosmetic testing. What do people need to know about that issue? And I think one of the things I'm curious about is this a legal requirement? Are companies required to do animal testing? Is this a safety issue? Are products not safe if they're not tested this way? Are they not safe to use in humans? What do people need to understand about this issue?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that there are many non-animal alternatives now to evaluate product safety. And what the government needs to do is start catching up to that reality and incorporating those methods into legislation. So there was huge progress on this issue last year through two pieces of legislation. The first was a straight up ban on new cosmetic testing on animals, as well as a ban on importing any products that are tested in the future on animals. So that's amazing. And the second thing was a revision to environmental protection laws that um, involve animal testing. So the government is now under an obligation to produce a plan on phasing out animal testing for product safety. So that's things like testing floor cleaners, testing air fresheners, testing products that humans or the environment or other animals might interact with that could have a health risk. And right now, because the government's consulting on this, we're expecting them to come up with a plan to phase out these types of tests altogether, hopefully by 2035, which is a deadline that other jurisdictions have tried to abide by.
Very interesting. Camille, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about these issues. I think a lot of Canadians really care about animals and they want to learn more. We've heard today about animal welfare laws and legal challenges coming in 2024. No one wants animals to suffer or to be treated cruelly. Our laws should respect this value. Do welfare laws need to change? And do you think there's political will for them to be changed? You be the judge. I'm Christine, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.